And people are still over in the main plenary session listening to the UN presentation, because that was just when I came in, they just started the Q&A bit. So they might be a little bit late. But in the interest of not keeping everybody here until very late, I propose that we get started. So this is meant to be an interactive session to do with some questions around how to teach basic information, how algorithmic systems that are increasingly affecting the way in which we interact with the world online, how those work, getting a basic understanding around those. So if I can have the next slide. I don't actually, is this my connector? Okay. Yes, great. So to start things off, I wanted to do a little questionnaire, and we should switch over to the other thing. Is Rainer in the booth? All right. So yes, so this is the Mentimeter tool that was suggested to use. But I don't know, can we scroll up a bit so people can see the question? So the question is really, actually you also need to have the address to use. Can we have the scroll a bit so that we can see the top? Okay. Right. That's it. Scroll up again so that we can see the address. And it's the previous slide. We did test this during the lunch. That's the second question. Can we go one earlier? All right, great. So I'll just talk a bit about the ideas behind this panel while we're waiting for the technical solution things to be solved. So what you will see, we've distributed around the room already a couple of these boxes which contain a deck of cards, basically, that are one kind of tool which we've developed as part of a research project that was an engagement with young people, 13 to 17-year-olds, in which we discussed with them their experiences of interacting with online systems and their concerns around how algorithmically information is being mediated and they don't have control over that, potential for ways in which this could be biased, and they might be being nudged into certain directions through that. And so through their interaction with them and hearing from them the concerns around how their teachers, for instance, have very little material or clear knowledge for communicating around how these systems work, we developed a toolkit, and this is an important part of it, around how to communicate the basic understandings of how the algorithmic ecosystem that you're interacting with is working. So it's not about the technical details of how does a program, how to program, or how does deep learning work, or anything like that. It's about the fundamental questions around why is data being collected for you in order to do algorithmic content moderation? What kind of values go into that? How is it that even though it's an algorithmic system that, in a sense, runs on mathematical equations and computations, it is not a neutral thing. There are values built into this. How are we doing on the technical support? They're still looking for someone. Okay, so I'll just go on to the next slide, which is more of a general question to the audience. Why is algorithmic literacy necessary? Would anybody like to offer some suggestions? And I did speak around it a bit already. Yes, in the back? Do we have does this thing work?
You need to be on the mic, otherwise it's not recorded. So it's like unknown question from unknown person.
Sorry, yeah, just repeating myself. I think it's necessary so we know. My name is Henna. I'm a researcher at Goldsmiths in London. So we know when we do a search or when we see something on our Facebook feed or on our Twitter feed, we know how it came to be there, who decided that it would be presented to us, and also who and what was excluded as well in its place.
Thank you. That's a very thorough answer. Any other things, any other reasons why why it might be important to have a basic kind of algorithmic literacy for everybody, as opposed to just as children or just people in a particular technical sphere? Okay, here we've got somehow we've jumped to a next question point already.
So you need to go in the first question.
Yes.
Before.
I have no idea where we're going with these questions. Maybe we should forget about the questions. Nobody actually has the address to submit responses? Okay. So does everybody in the room at least see the address? And if you have a tool, a smartphone or something, you can go there and you'll find the questions there. So the idea was just to get some polling from the room as to where you are in this space around. So the range of very bad to very good. How good is your general algorithmic literacy level? I see most people rate themselves. Now this might be just one person, seeing as it's 100%, it's probably just one person replied. Okay, now. I think we're probably burning time, so I suggest that we actually skip this a bit more and go on to the next slide. If I can just get back to the slides. Thank you. So let's move on to here. Okay, so why is algorithmic mediation of content a big, important component really of life on the internet? And so one way to think of it is this little cartoon that I did of our experience when we interact with a social media platform, for instance, but this goes for many things. Basically, if you join the platform and you know nobody, you're very sad because it's not really a good experience. Then, as you are on the platform a bit, you connect to more people, it becomes more interesting, and it becomes more enjoyable to use it and more successful to use it. You interact with even more people and perhaps some non-people, other issues, other sites on the network, and the experience becomes better. However, as we've all experienced, the internet is vast. There are very many people and very many other kinds of sites on the internet, and as you connect to very many of them, if you just receive an unfiltered input from all of them, it becomes chaotic, it overwhelms you. So therefore you become unhappy again with your life connecting to the network. Which is where filters come in. You need some kind of a way in which to pick out the important bits as opposed to the bits that are just noise for you, from your perspective. And so that's really one of the core roles that algorithmic systems play in our interaction with the internet. So one way of thinking about this is that in a space such as the internet where the presence of information isn't really the major stumbling block usually, but rather the ability to find that information is the core thing. Good filtering is what determines a good service. However, the way in which the filtering is done can have significant impacts on not just people, but also society. So this was a study that was done in which they manipulated the way in which a search engine would present the rankings of certain political parties as results if you searched for them. And basically, because it is known that people tend to only look at the first couple of results in a search engine results page, moving a certain political party's response further down on the page will have a significant impact on how much it gets seen. And so they actually showed that for undecideds, this had a significant impact on how they were going to vote. So this is just one example of how the way in which the underlying algorithm works can have a very significant impact on society as well. And of course, we are quite familiar with this from recent years as events regarding our political space. But what is the basic underlying current that is going on, really? In effect, it's a case of a trade-off between convenience and the level of control that you have. So if we think of a search engine, for instance, the act of searching for content, we could theoretically retain complete control if we were using detailed search queries, using, for instance, SQL databases, and everybody would simply have to learn how to program your search in a detailed way. Yes, you have full control, but it's highly inconvenient. It's much more convenient to rely on an algorithm that is created by a company, such as Google being the majority provider in the world. Type in your question, you get a response, it's very convenient, but you don't actually know what that response is based on. You don't know all of the parameters that go into it. And this kind of trade-off between control and convenience increases as we go to other kinds of platforms. So on a PC, you still have a large screen, a large interface where you get many responses. As you move to the mobile device, the number of responses that you're actually seeing decreases, and if you move to a voice-activated device, you basically just get one or two responses, and the result that you're going to is completely determined by the algorithm. And even going back to relatively recent times, a huge amount of users of social media platforms were completely unaware of the fact that algorithms were playing an important role in the information that they got to see. So a lack of understanding of how these systems work is large and is concerning. And on the other side, there's a lot of hype around what the capabilities of these systems, including the use of blurring the lines of understanding when it is actually algorithmic versus when it is a human that is being presented as if it's an algorithm. And so people have very blurry understanding of how the world that they're interacting with actually functions, which leads to kind of magical thinking around this, which is one of the things that needs to be addressed. This was supposed to be another questionnaire, but I think we're going to skip those because that bit of technology didn't work so well. So there is now a growing movement towards developing some general literacy courses around how this online environment is working. This is one example, for instance, from an NGO, Common Sense Education, where they're focusing on a particular kind of question, such as how does the tracking technology work? Why are you being tracked online? How does that work? How does that what kind of implications does that have for the services that you receive? On a more general level, we have things like the Finnish government's push to provide a course, a general course for a wide part of the population. I believe they're targeting at something like 10% of the population to teach them fundamentals of how AI works. Now, the kinds of the way in which they've broken down their course is that they are really focusing on the technological side, to give people a core grasp of how the technology works. So they're looking at how does AI problem solving work, like what is, how does it do ranking, for instance, particular questions such as at the technical level, what is Bayes' rule, a statistical rule that tells you about how to take into account prior probabilities, etc., in making decisions, as well as questions around like neural networks. Everybody's hearing about it. What is the neural networks, to demystify those kinds of questions. Now, from our point of view, this is very valuable. However, it doesn't exactly address the kind of issue that came out of our discussion with young people's core concerns, because they weren't really asking about sort of the technical, how does this work, but more about the socio-technical kind of side, what goes into the making of these algorithmic systems, how do they impact, and getting sort of more of a basic understanding of how information and values and decision-making processes play a role. So the project that this deck of cards, which is distributed in the room, comes from is the Unbiased project, which ran for 2 years in the UK. It was a collaboration between 3 universities, the University of Nottingham, Oxford, and Edinburgh, and very much was focused around a co-production approach, working with young people, 13 to 17-year-olds, through stakeholder engagement workshops, to hear from them what their core concerns are, but also working with stakeholders from industry, from civil society groups, and from government to hear how they are approaching the questions and how they might respond to the issues that were being raised by the young people. And so one of the outcomes that came out of this project was the development of a fairness toolkit, which consists of 3 parts. The first part are these awareness cards, which are about raising awareness of how algorithms work, where they work, how the dynamics are in this space. The second part is this kind of graphical mapping, which is basically asking users to refer to a particular service that they're interacting with and indicate their concerns regarding the service, how they would like to see issues being addressed, which is something that they are encouraged to upload to us so that we can then share that with the designers of the system, which is the third bottom diagram there, which is really a request then to designers of the system to provide a response, to tell the users, you communicated to us that you have these certain concerns around our system, this is how we would address them, and why we feel that this is an important issue to address. So I'd like to go into a bit more detail now regarding the awareness cards. So it comes, the deck comes with 8 suits. One of them is just a glossary card that explains the basics of what is an algorithm. Then there's a deck of cards, a set of cards around the rights that you have, because lots of people don't actually realize how many rights they do have, and how they could potentially challenge the kinds of responses that they're getting. And then there's values cards. So this is to give a starting point of thinking of what kind of values might actually underline the construction of the system that you're building. So this is highlighting the point that, yes, it is a technology that you're interacting with, but technology is not neutral. There are values built into them. Then we have process cards. Process cards are really about a way of making you think about the system, but basically saying, you be the algorithm. If you were an algorithm that was supposed to do a certain kind of task, what kind of data would you need? What kind of values might you put into that, etc. So it's to generate thinking around how do these systems work by basically trying to simulate being one yourself. There's data cards, fairly self-explanatory. Example cards are a number of examples of cases of bias that have been shown to arise within algorithmic systems. Factors cards, so these are factors that go into decision making, such as what kind of a fairness measure are you going to use in your particular context. And exercise cards are some cues, ideas for how to interact with these systems. So here would be, for instance, one example, an exercise card around analyzing a decision. So using that exercise card, you'd be prompted to choose an example card. For instance, can an algorithm be racist? This was an example describing a particular case where doing searches on Google for unprofessional hair ended up showing results that tended to be mostly African or Afro-Caribbean hair, as well as if you did a search for 3 black men, you tend to get images that indicated something like gang culture or crime, whereas if you did a search for 3 white men, you'd end up getting pictures of successful business people or something like that. So indications of some kind of racism that appears to come out of the search engine. So then the question is, what kind of data types do you think goes into this kind of a search engine algorithm that starts generating this kind of a racist result? So start thinking about official identity data. Is that something that might play a role? How about internet search data? My past internet search, is that something that might be used by the search engine to guide the direction in which these results come out? How about financial records? Is that something, etc.? Then think beyond that. Okay, so we've got certain kinds of data that goes into this, but the system was built. It was built by an organization. What kind of values might go into building this? It's an organization. It's a private sector organization. So they might have a value of power that goes into it. They want to be bigger than their competitors. They might have certain economic values. It's not particular on this set. But perhaps there's also a sense of altruism within a company. Is that something? Yes or no? A cue to start thinking about debating with your colleagues to what extent might these values or other values be something that went into the way in which the algorithm was built and therefore the way in which produces results. And then factors, for instance. It shows a kind of racism, apparently. So what kind of bias or prejudice might go into this kind of system? Where might that come from? Again, sort of cues for thinking about how the system is built and what it is that might lead it to generating these kinds of results, and then discuss, would you have trust in this kind of system? What kind of changes do you think would lead to a more trustworthy kind of system? So that's really the basic idea, is that the cards provide a guidance to start thinking about and discussing with the group around questions of how do these systems actually lead to the kind of results that we're seeing. And yes, the other 2 sets of cards, an example of those. So one, for instance, in the process cards, you might find things like be the algorithm for political campaigning. What kind of data would you want to do if you were doing political campaigning algorithm, etc. And again, you can go through that with your group and use the cards as a reference to start thinking about and discussing. And then this is an example of a rights card, consumer rights. So what I'd like to do now is to start engaging with you around exploring the use of these. So we've got 7 decks of these cards in the room. What I would like to suggest is that you get together around one of these decks and start taking them out so that we can try running one of these example trials together. So can everybody who has a deck of cards with them just hold it up so that everybody else can see that there is one there? Okay, so we've got one here, one towards the back, one in that corner, one over here, and another one there. So if perhaps people can try to come together around one of these sets of cards so that you can start using them together, having a look at them together, and try and run one of these. If we have too many people on one, I have one more deck here that I can be happy to join with. Okay, so yeah. Yes, sure. You can start by having a look at it, and then we'll go through. We'll try some of these simple starter games together. Well, yes, yeah, sure. In your group, you can have.
Should I help you out? Because I've also done the exercise before.
Yeah. If there's another group, there you can help out with. Yes. Okay. Sure. Yeah. So if you just have a quick look at the cards, you can see they're all based on providing some. There's potentially a bit text heavy if we think of the target audience as being children. That's one of the comments that was given to us. But I'm assuming that you're all fine with a bit of text on a card. So as you can see, we've got various types of cards here. Some of them giving more of an explanation around a particular thing, like the exercise cards or the example cards. Some of them just being headings like within this, the different types of data that might be collected and within that. So the first game, for instance, introductory game that one could try playing with this is focused around just the data cards. And really, so each group should have a facilitator who will ask the people in your group, what kind of a platform do you tend to use a lot when you go online? What do you tend to use that for? So if you as a group decide which platform it is that you want to be thinking about for this exercise, so I'll give you a minute. And then basically the idea is to start, you take just the data cards for this one, share them within your group, and then basically you put out the data cards and discuss how would this data, this kind of data, play a role on the platform that it is that you tend to interact with and what you're doing with that. So just as a way of starting you thinking about what kind of data goes into this. So yeah, I'll give everybody a couple of minutes to try this out, and then I'll ask just, what do you think of that? So the data card, for this one, it depends how competitive you want to play it. I would say within the group you can share the data cards and collectively talk about this data card. How do we think it relates to the platform that we're using? Does it or doesn't it? Yes, please.
No, I just wanted, because it says passional. It says we have a facilitator. Excuse me. The steps. So we're not sure if the facilitator should be one of us or you. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, elect someone in your group to be the facilitator. So each group can elect one person to facilitate things.
We are playing. So as I understand, I'll be the facilitator. Shall I? Okay. I would like to ask a question. Which internet web page you use most? I'm the facilitator for all, or for this small group only? For all.
So that would be sort of the way to. You've chosen a facilitator within your group. Your facilitator of that group then asks your group which kind of website or platform do we want to run this task around, and you get as a group you can decide, or if there's no consensus coming forward, the facilitator takes the lead on that.
Okay. Do I need the microphone or?
No, you don't. No.
Okay.
It's up to you whether you want to be a core.
The point is you can take any platform, so you can say, okay, we're going to use Google, or we're going to use Facebook, or we're going to use, yeah. So you choose what platform you're
I don't know. I don't.
looking
I
at,
think it's-
or Amazon, or whichever. So you basically now choose a platform and you say, okay, let's say we're Amazon, and then in Amazon you basically say, okay, so for Amazon to operate, what data would it want to collect about you? Is that correct?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
To give you an idea, an example. So let's say you pick a platform and you say, okay, I'm going to use Amazon. Now you start looking at the data cards and say, okay, so what data would Amazon want to know about me? That's the sort of idea.
For this one, yeah. Let's keep it. Okay, let me see. Can I borrow some data cards? Just one. Okay. So if we take the example that we've sort of suggested around an Amazon as a platform, for instance, how might official identity data be something that Amazon would want to have from you? Would they? Why would they want to have official identity data or not? That might be a question. Yes, please.
So you can say, okay, within that context, which type of data might that be? You can do that as well. You can say, as a group, it's probably the point of really is that the data part helps you to go through a thinking of what does this type actually do.
In a class setting, as an educational setting, we'll collect these kinds of problems that seem to suffer, and then make that as a class project as the next thing to explore. Can we answer these kinds of questions? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Sure. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. I think I'll end this one now. Talk a little bit about that, and then move to the next game, and then sort of it's just exploration about that, how this works. Well, maybe that would be something nice to maybe have during the discussion at the end. Something like how, what kind of deeper interaction might come out of this. Okay, hello. Can I pull your attention back out from the engaging discussions that you're all having? So this was just a very simple kind of introductory thing, using only the data cards. And as one of the groups already mentioned, one of the things, for instance, you can think of if this is being done in a classroom setting, might be that you've gone through this, you've decided, okay, this platform that we're all using, Amazon was the example that some of you work with now. As a group, as we played this game, we didn't really understand. We have this idea that maybe they're using this kind of data, but we don't really understand why or how they're doing this. And then, so as a class, you might collect these and say, okay, so this is something for a next project that we're going to do. Try and investigate how does what kind of information can we find online around why Amazon uses X and Y kind of data around us. So it can be a trigger for a next piece of work that the class can do. So now I wanted to, well, let's first ask you perhaps if you have a particular kind of question from this initial exercise that we did, a question about what it meant, or something that it raised in you, or a complete confusion around what the whole point is of these cards. Please, if anybody has. Otherwise, I'll move on to the next game.
Or a comment about something that surprised you.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Should I stand?
Whatever you like.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'll stand because too much sitting is not good. When we were, let's say, playing this game, there was a gradual, let's say, sensation, I would say sensation, but realization that all this kind of information, when you really contextualize it, you don't really think that much about it. I mean, we had a Facebook, as an example, probably some others may have had that one too. We realized that the extent of the information that they really have. Usually you realize that some of the information is there, but for some reason, maybe because of the lack of time, maybe because you don't really think about it, you don't really realize just how much information Facebook really has on you, how much data they really have on you, and especially considering that you're also kind of facilitating that if you're active on Facebook. Pretty much you can have a conclusion, you can conclude that you pretty much don't have a private life. There's not much left unless your deepest secrets. So this was one of the my takeaway from that little game that we had. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And I think that would be a nice example of something that can come out of the fact that you're doing it as a group exercise helps to work off of each other to bring up new questions that maybe you didn't really know to ask yourself first. And to a large extent, at least from, I think, from our perspective, literacy in this kind of space is a lot about taking a critical approach to it, to asking, what is this actually that I'm doing, instead of taking a non-critical, whatever is convenient, I'll run with that, and it's all just magic anyway kind of approach. Any other particular things that people would like to bring up now? Otherwise, I'll move on to the next one.
Can we take some of these cards?
Well, yes, actually.
How will we? Are they available somewhere?
Yes, the cards. I will have a slide at the end with a link to our website where you will find a link to a place where you can buy them at cost. Also, the ones that were shared out today are for people to take with them.
Don't fight over them. For what?
So,
You think?
look,
I don't know.
may I have your attention,
Sorry.
please?
Okay.
So, I really like the idea of playing cards because I see, from an educational background, I see it more as a collaborative approach of using these critical lenses, but also you sometimes need a push. So you get the push from your partner or from your teammate to think or to come up with these things. So we were discussing Amazon, and also there was a bit like very interesting, the politics and beliefs and the criminal records. So we were trying to think that, okay, where does these things happen? Like when we talk about the data privacy and the data, the use of the internet and as a digital citizen. So we produce a lot of data, and also we are, from an educational context, we are also the producers, but we are also the learner ourselves. But a lot of people, I mean, don't even know or even don't care about their data itself. But when you put these political beliefs, which is mentioned in this card, the things. So we thought about the academia and also the journalism, that they produce these contents, but these contents are sometimes used against them. Mm-hmm. I mean, when you go and challenge a powerful government or institution, also they have your records and everything, so they put it on you again. So it's a kind of conflict. I mean, producing your data and also protecting your data, but giving your data into others' hands to be used against you.
Is it anything you say may be used against you in a court of law? I heard that somewhere. Yoda.
Okay, so let's have a look at a slightly more. So this is a game that comes under the header of the starter class, what we just did. So if we look at an intermediate one, for instance, which starts using more of the actual deck of cards. So this is one where you start off using one of the example cards. Blue, is it? Are they blue? Yeah, one of the blue ones. No, purple, right, yeah, it actually has a color code here on the slide. So you choose one of the example cards and read it out within your group so that everybody knows what the example is. You shuffle the other cards and deal them between each other. And then basically you take turns to put one of the cards and try to explain to the group how this card, this value or data kind of card, relates to the example that was being shown. And so the cards that you need to be shuffling and dealing out between each other are the data cards, the factors cards, the rights cards, and the value cards. So to reiterate, this game starts within the group. You pick one example card, which you're going to put out and read out to the group so that everybody knows what the example is that you're going to use as a reference within this game. Which example are you doing?
Beauty contest.
Oh, yes. The AI beauty contest. Because that way you get rid of all the subjectivity in beauty, of course.
Of course. There's no subjectivity in beauty in general, right? Like in arts and music.
Yeah. But it's an AI. An AI must be doing an objective decision, right? What kind
but there is discrimination, if I understood it correctly, yeah?
So yeah, historically, it's basically about how the way in which society has historically been biased, how that feeds into the way in which algorithms will then generate responses to you. Historically, if historically certain jobs have been done by men, certain jobs by women, the algorithm, that if it's just being fed with data, it reproduces that and reinforces that, even if we as a society have actually said we want to move beyond that. Yes, those kinds of issues. Yes. So you look at the beauty contest one, yes.
Yeah. I don't really understand why is this. An example of that actually done. We just thought we were going to do an AI and why was it just because it's not the same as making it. Well, that's why I totally agree with you. That's the solution. They were surprised about reproducing a particular kind of
Which example have you gone with?
The race, can all women be racist?
Interesting. Okay, so it looks like every group has chosen an example that you want to be working with, and clearly just reading the example itself has already led to quite a bit of discussion, which is good. But so then moving beyond just looking at the example, the way to this kind of a tool might help to facilitate further thinking around it is that you then take the data, the factors, rights, and values decks, so that's the dark blue, light bluish, green and yellow decks. You would shuffle them and deal between each of you in the group, and then you go one by one, and the person whose turn it is has to take one of the cards from him and put out and explain to the rest of the group why this particular card, how this one relates to the particular example, and then the group can decide whether you feel like, yeah, this explanation makes sense, and if you decide you want to make it competitive, you can give points according to how good of the explanation was, or you can say, we're just here to learn, so your explanation is the only thing we're really interested in.
So our main challenge is young people and methodologies. So
Right.
they are
Yeah.
not attracted by us.
Uh-huh.
So these kind of games can bring some different.
Because it also, I think one of the nice things about this kind of a games, you can let the young people in a group do it. It's not dominated by the teacher or somebody who's just standing there and telling them this and that. As a group, you explore.
Sort of finding that.
Yeah.
I found this
Right.
the theme is more focused on the UK.
Yes,
than the
that's of course.
Local, yeah.
Rights tend to be national, and then you need to make a. Well, there's references to NHS, there's references to particular UK legislation. So the idea you'd have to make a local version.
Anyways, we will have to translate it.
Yeah, sure.
But to show the team and to see how it works.
Yeah. Locally relevant, particularly interest group, you must know. Particularly. I think really flexibly can be used totally, depending on your.
And things like the example cards probably need to be updated because in a few years' time, people will go, "This I don't remember this one at all." What's this about?
Maybe it will disappear.
No, the good thing is that you have something in your hand, a list of parts of you, that suddenly you feel that you have no control. Even you know, but when you read them all together, like all this, what were we were saying before this? What was that?
The data.
The data. I find that particularly fascinating. You have all these cadences in me, but the ugly part of it is someone can use it.
Do you have anything here that asks people what do they get from the services? What do they get from the platforms in terms of this trade-off?
I don't think so. I don't think we've included that. Would be a good idea. Yeah.
When we were seeing
Sure.
all this list of data, like what do we get from
Yeah. What is that? Why do we give this away? What's the in it for us? Yeah. Good.
That's a question also to be included.
Yeah.
As a facilitator in a group, you can ask, even if you don't ask.
Sure. Yes.
Why did you give this data? What did you do for that? And for how long?
And then, I mean, it depends how big you want to make. So then you can start doing what would be an alternative so that you can still get this kind of a benefit without having to give quite so much, or you can start exploring the space. Once you've more or less defined how do these, what is the underlying problem that the systems are trying to approach, and what is it that you don't like about the way it's currently being done, then you start talking about what would be alternative way of doing it, and start, that would be, great.
most people don't even see them yet. They would probably have done something that wants them to have a lower credit
But I think that's some kind of a
Yeah, that's just the name of the insurance company.
life in general, lifestyle in general, insurance companies profile us out there.
Yes.
Looks like that's what happened anyways.
Yeah, well, that's what they wanted to do, and so it was. Facebook presented it like, oh, we're not going to allow this because of the terms. They were totally going to allow it until Open Rights Group made a big fuss about it and said, this is, and then Facebook said, oh, actually, this is against our terms and conditions, so we are we're shutting this down. Yes.
One important that you can notice from these kind of things is that human being cannot do multitasking, psychologically speaking, in a kind of way. Maybe you can agree.
Male-female.
You cannot. I mean, I learned it from my professor. That no, sorry, learn multitasking.
Okay, hello. Again, I think probably this particular discussion in game can probably go on for a while. We only have a limited amount of time today, so I'm going to move on. Does anybody have any observations they'd like to share from having gone through this for a little bit now, played with this other parts of the deck of cards and this kind of an interaction comparing a particular example with some issues? Do you have any observations regarding your interaction that you feel you'd like to share around this?
Are you asking for
yes,
comments
I'm
on this
asking
card?
the group. So any observations regarding this game, for instance, that you'd like to share, something that came up unexpected or otherwise?
Okay. So can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
So I had an observation basically that there's a lot of, we had an example of beauty contests, of course, and the observation was that basically there can be so many data, but the developer of the algorithm is basically the one that states what this data will represent. So I think there should be some kind of, I don't know, maybe there is, like an ethical codex of which data can be used and how valued. Like in the end, for the result not to become this criminal or negative, because sometimes I don't think people really see that the result could be more negative rather than positive. It's just their thinking.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, that's one of the things that can come out of this discussion, that you say we actually feel that there should be some kind of a global, national, regional, whatever, kind of guidelines, consensus around what should be done, how things should be done, and that then connects to, as we know, the ongoing discussions around the governance of AI systems, such as the European Commission's high-level expert group, the OECD round on discussing around these questions, the various different ones that are currently ongoing. Yes, please.
Probably for the game, for the future, because we all liked at least Monopoly, and to earn a lot of money, maybe you can, just to have an idea on how much your data can cost, or can money
I think the mic doesn't work too well.
Of your data.
It does, but it has a strange echo in it.
So, yeah, so how much does my data cost? Or because I work with young people and I will play this game with them, and this is a question also I would like for them to answer themselves. So why do they want to have my data, and how much in a kind of experiment can that cost? How much am I worth? Yeah, how much is my email worth? I used to work creating database, and an email of a journalist can cost up to 20 euro. So I used to earn a lot of money. Okay, yes.
That's very interesting. I wonder if that's easily doable, coming up with some kind of a price list to share. It's probably something that would be a nice project to ask people. How might one go about finding out what the cost is? Or you can have a discussion about how this cost is actually, or this value is being generated. You know, what is this bidding process for data that starts to arise? Those kinds of questions. We do, I think, have a process card around Be the Algorithm, which goes a bit in that direction of be the algorithm that is trying to do some marketing to people, and then it asks you to look at the data cards. What kind of data would you want to have in order to do marketing? What kind of values go into, you know, if you are somebody who's building this, what kind of values do you have when you're building that kind of an algorithm? Which doesn't directly answer the interesting questions that you raised, but it actually probably points towards raising that same question. Okay, so we are actually already in the last half hour of this session. So, yes.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I don't know if this works or not. Yes. I was just going to say actually that whatever is the price that you cost, it is a heck of a lot, because when you look at those companies that actually make money out of that data, it's a multi-billion-dollar worldwide business, and they're among the most powerful companies in the world now. So you obviously are worth a lot.
So yes, so one of the other kinds of games, and this is something that focuses around the process cards, is this kind of set of Be the Algorithm. Start to try to think through, if I was an algorithm that was tasked with doing a certain kind of thing, what would I need? What kind of values would I be built on? How would I go about this? So the idea behind this game, which is in the advanced class, is that you start off with the values, with a process card, and two values cards. So you read out the process card amongst each other. For instance, you could have a process like spreading of a rumor, and values such as tradition and commerce. And then you could say, okay, if this is the process and these are the values, what might be the issue here? And you could say, okay, the theme of this session is going to be millennials are killing the music industry. And so that's going to be the theme for this particular round that you're going to play. And then you start looking at creating your own algorithm around this theme. So you'll choose data cards, lay them out in front of you, and then take turns to choose one of the data cards and think about them, how they might help to create an algorithm for this theme. And then lay that out in front of the selected cards. Once you've gone through the data cards that create sort of the theme, around the theme of your process, then you start looking at rights cards. What kind of rights might actually play a role in this kind of a theme? If you're being this algorithm, what are the rights that you need to be careful to not violate, or are rights that you might actually be able to boost, to reinforce with your algorithm? And then what kind of values might go into building this kind of system. So it's really about thinking around an algorithm within a kind of theme, and then how might we build that if we think of ourselves as either being the algorithm itself or the people who are building the algorithm. And it's really about getting a feeling as to the fact that these are not constructs that came out of nowhere. They are things that have been built by people within organizations, and it's really a human social construct is the creation of these algorithms that we are interacting with. And so trying to get a feel for understanding when you're building this, what are the things that go into that? So the idea is to start with a process card and two value cards in order to generate your theme of what this particular algorithm that you're going to build is all about.
Ansgar, I have a question actually. It's Olivier speaking. Would this be the sort of exercise that an advertising agency might go through if it says we're going to be selling for one of our customers, we want to promote this product? Would they be going through an exercise like this and say, how do we now build the image of this product?
Yes, I would imagine so, that they might be doing exactly this kind of thing with a slightly different mindset as to that they're just trying to find out how do I maximize the selling, whereas we're in the mindset of how do I maximize my understanding of how these things work.
is co-designed with a number of groups of everything what their concerns are. And we had a design guide to help us with the layout, that kind of stuff. Yes. Basically building up through 1 year of doing workshops with people, building up more understanding of where they're coming from. Then sketching out initial ideas for projects. When we so far didn't know whether we wanted to go with the college we did know we wanted something that was offline or interactive. But yes, so then we go into the college to go it's like something like what kind of steps do we want to yeah, we can. And you can download the PDF of the stuff from our site as well. So if you want to look into it or if you want to print it out, there's the one that I'm very simple. So you can also, we also provide a so you can order them and it's just the cost of producing them. Yeah, that was just an example. You can build your own tools from So then, if that's what you're trying to achieve with your algorithm, what kind of data is it? What you would be required in order to be able to do that kind of goal? Think about how would you actually make that kind of algorithm? What is it going to use? How would it do the targeting? You can go beyond what's directly in the card. The card will be there to start targeting. why. Yeah, and then
not going to have time for that. But going to have Okay, hello. We are actually running a bit low on time. Hello. May I have your attention, please? Hello. We are close to running out of time. So that's why I'd like to, even though you haven't had enough time to really get into this third game and explore it in depth, I'd like to ask again whether you have any observations on this, or also, since we're now already in the final Q&A bit, we only have 5 minutes for that, any other observations you might have, suggestions for changing it, which you can do yourself, or we can try and work on that, or other kinds of ideas around algorithmic literacy raising that don't have to be related to this particular tool. Does anybody have something they'd like to bring forward for discussion? You can start with an observation of the last game that you played, for instance.
Thank you. A very interesting game, very good, but at the same time, people we here are more or less informed. We are the audience who actually either already knew it or has identified really small novelties maybe. How do you reach to wider audiences, let's say school children, elderly people who do use Facebook maybe, Amazon as well, but they don't really know how it works? They are surprised that all of a sudden Google suggests some advertisements or Facebook, but at the same time for them to have informed choices, it's very important. So how do you reach out with this game or with any other resources? That would be interesting to hear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, that's very important, and one of the things that's actually very close to our heart as well. So one of the reasons why we chose this kind of a medium for the tool is because it's low cost. And so it makes it easy for schools, for instance, if the audience we're targeting is children, to be able to afford to buy these. And we did, for instance, in our first round, we created these cards, and we didn't have those particular extra exercises yet. We tried it out with some school teachers, and they said we need a bit more of a guidance to help us going with these things. So that's why we developed the additional booklet around that. So the hope is that this is a low threshold kind of tool that can be picked up by schools and that teachers can use when they're being asked do something on digital literacy, but they don't have any good tools around that, and starting from scratch is very difficult. But there are a lot of other populations that aren't in this kind of an institutional setting like schools. So we are also trying to bring this to groups and organizations that can do this. One of the things that we were very conscious of is that this being an outcome of a research project, they risk dying as soon as the funding for the research project is gone, which is one of the reasons why we are currently engaging with other organizations to try and see who wants to pick this up. And I mean, you can basically just use it from its Creative Commons, use it as you wish. And our current research project, which is more on trust in algorithmic systems, we are actually engaging with a 65+ group to see what their particular concerns are, more on the trust side, and potentially do something similar for them. Yes.
How did you decide the values and the factors? Is there any reference framework that you decided to include these values or these factors? Or
so the factors are very much skewed around the questions around bias and fairness, because that was the particular theme of our research project. The values, this came to a large extent out of the discussion also with the young people, the co-production process. Obviously, some of them were sort of injected from us, from saying, well, these are some key things that you need to be thinking about, but others came out of that as well. And beyond that, the details of this, I would have to check with a particular team that actually worked on that part. Any other questions? Or perhaps you have some other educational tool around in this space that you'd like to bring to the attention of people. Yes?
Thank you. So basically, I'm working on 2 projects right now currently. The one deals with the digital competence, the EU framework that has been made in 2013, and now we have upgraded that. So that digital competence actually is about, we have this tool, Digital Competency Wheel, which measures your level of digital competence, that how competent you are, and those things, the framework defines certain competencies, which is made of sub-competencies, which includes everything, and it actually gives you the whole result. So and my other project is about, it's with the volunteers organizations. We are working on a digital literacy program, and we have this digital grassroots plus the digital literacy program, in which we are focusing on the African countries and the North American countries to engage youth actually to take part in those in that program, and then they read and they go through all these things. Actually, that's kind of when you talk about the internet and all these things, because right now I mean, in the global south we have like different focus, and in the rest of the world we have different focus because of the accessibility and the use of these kind of things. So what actually we're now trying to do is, maybe in this next month, is that we are trying to merge those together. And I found your idea very interesting, that how we can make it so to combine those platforms together, that on one side you educate people, you bring people on the platform, you educate them, and they learn, and then also you evaluate or assess their competence level on a large scale. So that's the basic idea. And also you mentioned the AI course of Finland. I come from Finland, so Finland has like, the design would be the same AI program that we have, and also ICANN and other organizations have, IZOC have also designed those kind of platforms or programs where you can go and you can take the course, and then you can also assess yourself, and also you can come to know about a lot of these things. But, well, maybe I will be approaching you in the near future for getting some suggestions and recommendations of your work as well, and how we can merge those together. But that's the basic idea, that we want to merge, we want to bridge the gap between this, the digital divide that has been created. So we don't talk about the accessibility, but we talk about all the things together. So that's the basic idea of our project. Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing. Sounds like a very interesting and very worthwhile project. And I'd be more than happy to talk with you about how perhaps we can share some of our experiences to help along with that. Yes, please. Okay.
I'm Mateja from Slovenia, Faculty of Social Sciences, and also the helpline. So first of all, thank you very much for this. It's really useful. We also run workshops in schools, like from 12 to 19-year-olds. And this will be an excellent tool when it comes to bias and prejudice and stereotypes to sort of get them thinking about it. It really sort of enhances critical thinking, which I think is one of the difficulties. So that's really good. I wanted to ask you something, but now I forgot, and I think we're also running out of time. So thanks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm sure the question will come back to you later.
So, okay, one more thing. Can we have this about the card games? I want to give this floor to other people. Do you have, you can build it on yourself as well? Because right now, it's a specific thing that you can just build your project on, right? So in a quick way when you have a good team. But if we have to design it for ourselves, like for our different projects, is that also possible to make such a deep kind of thing? Because if you see the cards, there are quite more, and a lot of things are there. So,
well, we're happy to share with you our experiences of how we went through this process. And actually, it was a two-stage process. One part of it was more of a youth engagement kind of workshops, get the young people into the room, present them with some initial scenarios to start discussions, and really try and have a youth-led discussion going on to hear from them what their views are as opposed to telling them what they should be concerned about. And we do provide on our website also links to the way in which we ran those sessions, if that's something that you're interested in. Then doing a qualitative data analysis of the recordings of the discussions during that, which can be a lengthy, intensive process of work. And from that, identify the key themes that arose and use those themes then to drive the construction of these this particular toolkit, which, yes, of course, was targeted at a particular kind of issue, bias in algorithmic systems in our case. So you generate the initial sessions, etc., around different kinds of trigger examples fitting with the particular themes that you want to be going with. Is there anybody else with some questions, issues? We are actually already 5 minutes over time. So thank you very much, everyone. And so this is the website where you can access all the information regarding this toolkit. It includes a link to the place where you can order some of these cards for yourself. And the decks of cards that are out there are for you to take with you. Please negotiate amongst each other who gets to have the deck of cards. Thank you.